I miss all of y'all. All y'all girls standing together like that. I can't take it.
So fantastic to be here in Nashville. Some of you might remember back in Austin, Norm Page and myself were up on our black tuxedos. We offered everyone champagne, and we were talking about the premium programmatic club. What does it take to actually be in that top level of publishers, really getting it right for the brand advertiser? So we talked then about Tinder for programmatic, how we can actually connect buyers to sellers and automatically, as it were, transact what the buyer wants to buy straight into the language the publisher might use to segment their inventory on DoubleClick DFP through to AdX or perhaps into AppNexus on their sell-side platform. But today, I wanted to talk more about the quest for the perfect impression. Now, we just heard Matt talk about transparency and also the idea of getting lots of vendors together to actually solve a problem together. And what we have today, I'll be talking about several partners of ours working together for that quest for the perfect impression. But let's start with that word transparency. How many people here are trading? So who are the buyers here trading with at least 80% or above percent of viewable impressions? I can't see because of the lights, but are there any hands raised where people are demanding high viewability of their buys? No one? A few people. And what about the sellers? How many sellers are kind of mixed up with lots of different viewability providers trying to work out, how do I get my 80%? Anyone struggling with that? Okay. What actually is behind that request for viewability? I think it's what Matt said just a moment earlier. It's transparency. I actually want to know where my ad is going. So the idea that I'm just wasting my impressions on the non-viewable sort of robots or the non-viewable consumers who haven't actually seen my ad is actually not the real thing. The real thing is, can I get transparent? Can I know exactly where my brand is going? Now, one of our biggest buyers in the market said, look, we love using Integral because Integral's very good at telling us those are the bad sites and these are the good sites. So they whitelist and blacklist. But they said, we're moving on. We've already got our own garden wall of whitelist sites. So I need a new technology that can actually help us understand exactly what's toxic to one of my brands. I might be on the New York Times. It's going to be about those horrible events in Paris a few days ago. But it's toxic to my brand. And it's a premium website. But I have to be very clear that if it's Volkswagen and it's to do with diesel emissions, I don't want to be there. So they've actually phrased it keyword blacklisting. So they're using keywords to actually determine exactly which pages are right or bad for their brand. So that early idea of that sort of condom of safety for actual programmatic trading has got a few holes in it. And people are moving further and deeper to actually try and say, how can we get it just right for that particular brand? It's a chocolate brand and they need to avoid obesity. It's a Kimberly-Clark Huggies brand and they've got adult diapers and they really need to communicate the special storytelling around adult diapers, but just to the right audience. And that's where keyword controls can come in. So for us, economic safety is more than brand safety. It's saying, how can we make those brand dollars work well for you? So we've partnered up with a company called Moat. And Moat have a really good dashboard. They report back on not just what was robotic and not human, what was viewable or not viewed, but essentially, where was the engagement? To what extent did we have dwell time, hover time? And essentially, it's starting to answer what the brand wants to know when they come to programmatic. They want to know who saw my story, who engaged, who actually responded. So coupling together the right context, perhaps with the right engagement metrics, starts to tell that brand advertiser the transparency. This is where your campaign went. This is actually how the consumers responded. Your story was indeed told. And getting that right at the economic price is important, whether it's OpenRTB or in the private marketplace. Now, Google used keyword technology 15 years plus ago, and they used the keywords to be very, very controlling for the buyer. When you buy AdWords, you don't get a whole load of waste. Now, to what extent do publishers put up into their open private marketplace in RevConnect or whatever, big bundles? Oh, this is my food bundle. But the buyer doesn't really know what they're getting. They haven't got that control and precision of knowing what's on the page, like an AdSense type technology. So we found a lot of our buyers starting to think, how can we use keywords to really get what we want? Not just that Volkswagen diesel emissions I need to avoid, but what do I really want? So Grapeshot works with about 350 trading desks. And if I take someone like Acuin, they've created 500 custom segments One of them will be for Airbnb. They want to find audiences reading about Nashville country music. And so they're trying to find live audiences in context, reading about very particular keywords and saying, my story can now be about Nashville and the music, and actually engage you with that creative story and get it. So essentially, if someone like Zax has got 400 custom segments, Acumen 500, they're all mobilizing these keyword tools to decide exactly what they want to buy. And that's strange, because we hear of publishers who open up their private marketplace to private auction. They open up these deals, and yet the win rates are so low. And say someone like The Economist, who's one of our customers, they basically open up their whole Economist audience, and the demographic is, I'm The Economist. But they have not been able to articulate different personas of that audience. All they're doing is allowing people to pay a slightly higher price in private auction, but they can sniff around and overlay their first-party data, and essentially the publisher is none the wiser. So how can the publisher start to get the perfect impression, not just the buyer exert technology controls to decide exactly what they're buying in that private marketplace? So what are the segments for sale? It seems strange to me that a publisher invests so much on a content management system, and so the journalist writes the article and the story gets pumped into the fashion section, or the business section, or the auto section. And essentially, who has made the decision to sell that publisher inventory? It's not the commercial guys, it's the editors. My audience. But that audience is not the segment the buyer wants to buy. They want to buy the Airbnb. They want to buy HP competitors. You know, who's reading about all the competitor brands of my customer at HP? Their world of segmentation is completely different in terms of the live audiences they want to reach, compared to the publishers actually often, in a traditional sense, farming up, publishing out exactly what the editors want to write. So how can we create virtual segmentation quickly and easily in the language of the buyer? I would suggest keywords are one of those tools. So what are the segments that publishers are actually mobilizing? Are they the self-invented top 10 bestsellers in RevConnect I put out onto Pubmatic or to Rubicon? Or can we actually open up the diversity of our audiences and inventory by using similar tools to Google, keyword technology and other tools to say, you know what, you can choose how to segment my audience. You can choose how to segment my inventory. It's not pre-packaged with the assumption that I'm guessing what the buyer wants to know. So it all comes down to respecting the brief. Essentially, when you get that RFI or RFP, I think the brand advertiser is trying to communicate it into a demographic, communicate it into a type of lifestyle. But you have to ask the question, what do these audiences actually do? What do they consume? I was at Mindshare in London last Thursday showing the idea that instead of listening to the pulse of Twitter at 6,000 tweets a second, companies like Grapeshot are listening to the whole bid stream at 3 million live consumer impressions per second. The pulse of knowing what consumers are reading out there in the bid stream, I think, is at a scale well beyond the Twitter sphere. And they're actually real consumers, live audiences, reading certain keywords, certain content, all out there. And it's fascinating to actually now use the programmatic bid stream to tell the brand what is trending. Actually tell them the story they've got to tell in 4 hours' time with a video ad that can actually chase down that trending theme around their brand. So whether it's a Donald Trump or a James Bond or we were playing around with Land Rover and Argos, a retailer, we could see these live trending themes with a whole set of keywords, and you should just go and buy that media. But my point is, keywords are in the written document of someone saying, this is what I'm after. I want to chase down my competitors. I want to chase down a certain audience that likes, perhaps they like buying Gucci handbags, or they like buying whatever. At the end of the day, it's a proxy for a live audience. What are they engaged with? So my question is, how do publishers really respect the brief? Do they just sell the demographic of their audience at large, or are they able to segment their audiences in the language of the buyer? So respecting the brief, I think, is very important. And you know, Facebook sells custom audiences, and the buyer is thirsty for custom audiences. So isn't it rather easy to actually define a custom segment, actually take your first-party audiences and build your own custom audiences and retail those at a higher price? I think a lot of publishers are choosing their DMP. It can be Alchemy, it can be Crux, and many others. But what we've heard, we equip Turbine, which is Xaxis's main audience DMP, and we collect signal around, I think, about 50 countries. But they're specialists, and they run the DMP, and it's very hard to change the taxonomy. It's very hard to say, oh, I've got Kellogg's. They've just been on the phone. Right, I want to do a sponsorship deal. I'll sell direct, traffic it through DFP, or I'll actually essentially sell direct through programmatic guaranteed. How do you mobilize your custom audience of everyone reading about breakfast cereals and yogurt and all the sort of healthy things you might have at breakfast? That's where Kellogg's want to tell their story. Well, there are other ways of doing it. You basically find the custom audience live, and then you start to collect your first-party cookie quite simply in some of the DSP or DMP stacks. But you can mobilize these audiences very quickly in a matter of hours. You don't have to define a rigid CMS or a rigid taxonomy for your DMP. You can be much more nimble. So the alchemy of turning value from those digital cents to those dollars, I think the plumbing's there, and we think the buyer can actually connect to the seller. But I would question whether the sellers have actually equipped themselves to really respond flexibly and nimbly to those inbound calls for those direct sales, or to what extent they already know those 350 traders we happen to have who've already articulated what they want to buy well up front, 3 or 4 weeks before the campaign goes live. How can we equip those sellers to essentially carve up their inventory and audiences easily and quickly? And some of you might have seen something we've put together, the Tinder for Programmatic Vision, where literally it's a click of a button. The buyer chooses which sellers to approach because the bid stream's already revealed which publishers have which keyword overlaps with their buyers. So the alchemy of creating value goes, I think, a lot further than just requests for deals, which is something we participate in. I think it's the union of a lot of different technologies that say, look, brand advertiser, we can combine, for example, the best of Moat, which is all to do with fraud, human detection of the traffic, the viewability ratios, the hover rates, the dwell time. We can dovetail it with custom brand safety in terms of really making sure it's safe for the campaign with something like Grapeshot, or essentially the positive context of keywords. We can couple it with Cargo. So Harry Cargman from Cargo invested hugely in the video storytelling on his premium video mobile network. And so the likes of Harry, Jonah, and myself have really started to think about what is the quest for the perfect impression? To what extent can we relay back to the brand advertiser and say, yes, full transparency, we know exactly where the ad was served. Yes, we know it was human. Yes, we know it was engaged to this degree. Yes, it's the most creative ad unit you've ever seen on a mobile device. And yes, your story was told. So the challenge really is not to connect the plumbing pipes. It's to what extent can we, in the publisher community and the buyer community, make sure that the story is created, it is genuinely delivered. And the quest for the perfect impression is really that economic safety, but actually that economic brand value for the buyer's dollars. So the quest for the perfect impression. You'll see a lot about it in the press over the next few months, but I'd ask the question back in your own business. To what extent are you really putting together a fusion of tools that can say, we're not just transparent and safe and viewable, but we're going to the next level. Let's hear those creative stories told and consumed by our audiences. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Hold on a second. I want to see if we have any questions for John. Anyone? We have a couple microphones around. Okay. Just one before you go. We heard about the transparency part from the brand and agency town hall. What are the, you sort of touched on it. What are the big sort of challenges there?
I'm surprised. I was talking to a colleague who used to work at Comscore, and she was saying recently, look, John, these publishers, they invest in content. That is their business. Yet no one's really come through with the kind of simple index that says, I over-index on, let's say, rugby or soccer, or I under-index on these particular contexts. And I think context has been a sort of hidden flavor to programmatic advertising in the last 3 years. We've been so excited by cyber-stalking people around. Criteo retargeting people who've been on a merchant site. Let's retarget them back. But we've actually lost the magic of the value of the content. And a publisher customer on AdNexus the other day said, look, John, I don't call it context. I call it live audience, like live TV. And I think publishers can quite easily, through their URLs and sort of contextual analysis, reveal where they're over-indexing on live audiences. I mean, don't TV stations get excited by live audiences? And it's as if we've got the demographic flavor of gender and age, but the publishers aren't articulating, I am transparent, this is what I'm selling, and my live audiences are reading all this beautiful content that all my editorial staff, bust the gut to actually deliver.
Great. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it, John.
Thanks.
Okay, and now we're going to shift to